In the shadows of medieval Europe, where survival meant choosing between starvation and servitude, a story was born that would haunt the human imagination for over 1,000 years. The tale we think we know, the glass slipper, the fairy godmother, the happily ever after, is only a sanitized echo of something far older and far more disturbing. Before we descend into its blood-soaked beginnings, take a moment to subscribe. Because tonight we're stepping into a world where foot mutilation was the price of royal marriage, where magic came with a debt measured in generations, and where happiness was bought with suffering. Drop a comment telling me where you're re-listening from and what time it is in your part of the world, whether under the midnight moon of North America, the pre-dawn darkness of Europe, or the twilight skies of Asia. Together, we form a circle that stretches across the globe, just as this story has traveled through centuries, growing darker each time it was told. Forget the innocent fairy tale of childhood. The real Cinderella belongs to a world where stepmothers demanded flesh, where transformation required sacrifice, and where social ascent meant surrendering your very self. Every name, every place, every version of this story carries the weight of centuries of survival. These aren't just stories. They're cultural DNA, blueprints of how our ancestors understood power, change, and the terrible cost of breaking one's place in the social order. From cannibal mothers in prehistoric Europe to class warfare in the Middle Ages, from ritual dismemberment to the psychological torment revealed by later authors, Cinderella remains one of humanity's darkest and most enduring legends. Every retelling tried to soften its cruelty, but the horror at its core refused to die. Beneath the silken gowns and magic carriages lies an ancient truth, that real transformation always demands blood. To understand this story, we must travel back long before Disney, before Grimm, before Perrault, back into the mists of prehistory, when the story of Cinderella first took form. Long before it was written down, this tale was spoken around fires in prehistoric Europe, where myth served as survival instruction. In these earliest versions, the girl who would become Cinderella was not a helpless dreamer waiting for rescue, but a willing participant in her own violent metamorphosis. Scholars who have compared Indo-European folklore suggest that her transformation was achieved not through magic, but through ritual cannibalism, the symbolic consumption of her mother's flesh to inherit her power. In those ancient rites, the heart gave courage, the brain gave cunning, the hands bestowed skill, and the tongue granted eloquence, everything a woman needed to rise from peasant to queen. These ceremonies took place under certain lunar phases, often within the same stone circles that still stand in the European countryside. There, in the flickering torchlight, young women devoured their past selves and were reborn into new identities. The stepmother of later stories began as a figure of cosmic duty, not personal cruelty, a ritual executioner whose task was to break the initiate, to prepare her for transformation. Her cruelty was sacred. She existed to destroy the girl's old identity so that a new one could emerge. The stepsisters represented failed transformations, those who attempted the ritual but could not complete it. Their mutilated feet, remembered in later tales, symbolized spiritual incompleteness, the cost of trying to ascend without true readiness. These early versions were not bedtime tales, they were survival manuals wrapped in myth. They taught that to rise above your station, you had to sacrifice everything: your flesh, your past, your name. And if you failed, the punishment was eternal. As centuries passed, religion reshaped the story. Christianity swept across Europe, and the pagan rites of blood and rebirth were forbidden. Yet the story endured, transformed, but not forgotten. The devoured mother became ashes in the hearth, and from those ashes came the name that still echoes today, Cinderella. The girl's transformation was no longer powered by cannibalistic ritual, but by divine grace. The stepmother became a symbol of sin, the stepsisters, envy and greed, and the heroine, a purified soul. But beneath this surface, the old truths remained: pain as purification, transformation through suffering, and salvation through endurance. In medieval versions, the grotesque traces of ritual violence reappeared. Germanic tales told of stepsisters slicing off their toes and heels to force their feet into a golden slipper, only to be betrayed by the blood that filled their shoes. The slipper wasn't a token of beauty, it was a vessel of sacrifice. The prince's search for a perfect fit was less about love than about purity earned through pain. Even the royal ball, that shining moment of revelation, was not a celebration, but a rite of passage. Each dance was a ritual gesture, every glance from the prince a divine test. When the heroine fled at midnight, it was not fear of discovery, it was the exhaustion of one who had borrowed power she hadn't yet earned. The stroke of 12 marked the closing of a sacred window when the supernatural withdrew, demanding repayment for its gifts. By the Renaissance, as Europe's class systems hardened, the story evolved again. Nobles and commoners alike lived in a world where social climbing was both desired and dangerous. Cinderella's rise became a symbol of forbidden aspiration, a dream for the powerless, a warning for the privileged. Writers like Giambattista Basile captured this tension in their early literary versions. His heroine, Cenerentola, didn't win because she was gentle or pure, but because she endured humiliation without breaking. Her triumph wasn't moral, it was psychological. She survived. Beauty in these versions became a double-edged weapon. It granted access to power but marked its owner for suffering. To be chosen by the prince wasn't love, it was conquest. The poor girl elevated to nobility reassured the powerful that hierarchy was divinely sanctioned, while teaching the powerless that suffering might one day be rewarded if endured quietly enough. The old message was reborn: obey, suffer, and perhaps your endurance will buy your salvation. By the 19th century, romantic writers and early psychologists began to see what had always been hidden within the story: that Cinderella was not about romance at all, but about transformation through trauma. Beneath the glitter and magic lay an ancient truth about identity and loss. The ashes she sat among symbolized the death of the ego, the destruction of the old self before rebirth. The fairy godmother represented not divine help, but inner strength, the reawakening of power buried beneath pain. The ball was the confrontation with one's ideal self, radiant, desired, but impossible to sustain. The act of mutilating the foot in this light became the ultimate metaphor for self-destruction in pursuit of perfection, the way society carves us to make us fit its mold. The glass slipper was not a gift, it was a trap. It fit only one person because it symbolized a life narrowed by suffering and shaped by loss. Even today, the story endures because it mirrors a universal fear that to change, we must destroy who we were. That becoming something greater always requires leaving something behind. Beneath its delicate beauty lies an instruction that humanity has never forgotten. Transformation is violence. From the stone circles of prehistory to the golden palaces of storybooks, from ancient blood rites to animated fantasy, Cinderella's tale has survived because it speaks to something primal, our hunger to transcend and our terror of what that transcendence costs. Every culture that touched this story softened it, turned blood into magic and agony into grace. But the pulse of the old horror still beats beneath the silk. Cinderella isn't a story about love. It's a story about the violence of becoming, the agony of rebirth, the surrender of identity, the strange alchemy that turns pain into power. And perhaps that's why we keep retelling it, because deep down, we all dream of rising from the ashes, no matter the cost. In certain ancient variations of the Cinderella myth, The deformities of the stepsisters were not divine punishment, but self-inflicted consequences of a forbidden ritual. In their desperate attempt to consume sacred flesh without proper spiritual preparation, they committed a terrible act of ritual cannibalism that twisted both body and soul. Their scarred faces and deformed limbs became living warnings to others, a brutal reminder that transformation demanded precision, reverence, and sacrifice. Anthropologists now suggest these early versions preserved fragments of shamanic initiation rituals that predated Christianity, stories meant to disguise sacred rites as harmless folk tales. Through this lens, Cinderella was never merely a tale of oppression and reward, but a complete initiatory sequence: separation, abuse, supernatural aid, transformation, ordeal, and final ascension, stages familiar to Bronze Age societies. The candidate, often a young woman, was isolated from her community, confined in darkness, where she fasted and meditated, preparing her mind for what lay ahead. During this time, she was believed to encounter ancestral spirits who taught her forbidden chants and the secrets of consuming flesh to transcend mortality. The cruelty of her stepmother symbolized more than familial abuse. It was the destruction of the old self, a ritualized breaking meant to clear the vessel for rebirth. Even the fairy godmother of later centuries was originally the spirit of the devoured mother, returning as a spectral guide to lead her daughter through spiritual transformation. The entire village once took part in these ceremonies, some restraining the initiate, others preparing the sacred flesh, and others cleansing the remains to prevent vengeful spirits from haunting the living. When the ordeal concluded, the initiate was presented to supernatural beings, potential husbands from beyond the veil, who sought mortal partners capable of bridging two worlds. What later became the royal ball was once an assembly of these otherworldly suitors, and the glass slipper was no mere ornament. It symbolized crystallized spiritual energy, an artifact of transformation. Only one who had consumed divine essence without corruption could endure its touch. To fail meant instant annihilation, the slipper's power burning through unworthy flesh until nothing but ash remained. But those who succeeded were forever changed, intermediaries between human and divine realms, keepers of fertility, weather, and life itself. These early myths remind us that transformation was never gentle. It demanded a confrontation with monstrosity, a willingness to sacrifice comfort and sanity for transcendence. The Cinderella we know today is but a softened echo of those ancient rites, her grace and beauty concealing the bones of a story about blood, death, and rebirth. Centuries later, in the lavish chaos of 17th century Naples, the tale was reborn through the pen of Giambattista Basile. Beneath the gilded domes and shadowed alleys of that Baroque city, where superstition thrived beside grandeur, Basile's La Gatta Cenerentola emerged, a version of Cinderella as violent as it was poetic. His heroine, Zezolla, was no passive sufferer but a conspirator in murder, driven by grief and ambition. When her first stepmother died, her sorrow twisted into a desperate longing to restore the lost bond. On the urging of her cunning nurse, she plotted the death of her new stepmother, a scheme that demanded calculation, deception, and a chilling patience. Zezolla studied her victim's habits, staged the perfect accident, and executed the act with such precision that even her own tears became both proof of innocence and ingredients for transformation. But Basile's genius lay not in the act of violence itself, but in its aftermath. The nurse, now risen to power, betrayed Zezolla, enslaving her in the very household she had killed to control. Through this cycle of murder and subjugation, Basile exposed the brutal mechanics of power and inheritance that defined his world. When Zezolla's salvation finally came, it did not descend from heaven, but grew from the earth, from a date palm, nourished by her tears upon her stepmother's grave. This tree, described with divine reverence, drew upon layers of symbolism: the date, emblem of rebirth; the palm, sign of victory; and the ancient belief that trees could house ancestral souls. To summon its aid, Zezolla performed elaborate rituals, showing remorse for her sin, even as she reaffirmed her right to ascend beyond mortal bounds. Only through this balance, between guilt and ambition, destruction and renewal, could she awaken the supernatural forces buried in her lineage. Zezolla's transformation into nobility unfolds as both a spiritual awakening and a test of moral endurance. From the date palm that grew from her tears emerges a fairy unlike the cheerful godmothers of later tales, a being of immense power, both nurturing and terrifying, whose motives are guided not by kindness, but by the recognition of Zezolla's readiness for transformation. This supernatural figure represents the duality of creation, maternal compassion entwined with ruthless pragmatism. She aids Zezolla not out of sentiment, but because the young woman has shown the necessary intelligence, resilience, and psychological maturity to wield power without being consumed by it. The fairy's gifts are exquisite yet perilous, tools for ascension rather than rewards for virtue. Instead of a single gown and fragile slippers, Zezolla receives garments woven from ethereal matter, silks that shimmer like liquid starlight gold, that pulses and shifts with her emotions, and silver, that mirrors not her outward form, but the essence of her soul. Her shoes, carved from crystallized moonbeams, are conscious entities in their own right, guiding her movements, adjusting their radiance to her confidence, whispering secrets of etiquette and subtlety as she enters the dangerous world of courtly life. But the greatest of the fairy's gifts is not material, it is knowledge. Zezolla is taught the art of grace, the language of power, and the delicate machinery of influence. She learns to read the silent cues that govern aristocratic interaction, to craft her voice and posture into instruments of persuasion, and to weave conversation like music, measured, strategic, and intoxicating. By the time she enters the royal celebration, she has become more than beautiful. She is magnetic. Her presence alters the very atmosphere of the ballroom. The courtiers feel her before they see her, their hearts stirred by something that transcends desire, a pull toward the divine. The prince himself, enthralled, senses in her not mere charm, but recognition, as if a forgotten part of his soul has returned in human form. Basile understood this encounter not as romance, but as metaphysical alignment, two spirits vibrating at the same hidden frequency, drawn together by destiny and design. The midnight boundary, so often treated as a whimsical rule, is in Basile's hands a psychological metaphor. It marks the limit of how long a person can sustain an identity that does not belong to them. As long as Zezolla maintains perfect composure, the illusion of nobility endures, but a single moment of sincerity, an unguarded breath of authenticity, threatens to shatter it. Midnight represents the collapse of performance, the hour when the mask grows too heavy to bear. When the clock strikes, her transformation unravels, not because the magic fades, but because her will falters under the weight of pretending to be something more, or perhaps less, than herself. In the aftermath, the infamous fitting of the slipper unfolds not as a test of luck, but as a ritual of revelation. The stepsisters, desperate for elevation, turn to mutilation in their attempt to force belonging. The first cuts away her toes, believing blood can purchase refinement. Her screams echo through the palace, exposing the agony behind ambition. The second severs her heel, limping toward deception until the enchanted shoe grows unbearably heavy, rejecting her with the weight of her own falsehood. The third crushes her foot entirely, shattering bone in her frantic struggle to embody what she can never spiritually become. These scenes of bodily destruction mirror real practices among Renaissance elites, where beauty and social acceptance were often bought through pain, surgery, and submission. Basile uses this grotesque imagery to reveal the truth of transformation, that imitation without inner evolution brings ruin. The stepsisters' courage is undeniable, but their ignorance of the sacred balance between body, soul, and power condemns them. When Zazola finally reveals herself, the illusion is gone, and yet she stands more regal than ever. Her transformation is complete not because of the magic, nor the garments, nor the prince's love, but because she has integrated her darkness, the cunning, grief, and guilt that once chained her, into wisdom. She becomes queen not through escape from her past, but by mastering it. The date palm still grows in her garden, its roots feeding on buried secrets, its branches whispering the cost of rebirth. Through Zazola's story, Basile immortalized a truth that transcends centuries. Transformation demands confrontation with the self, and power requires the merging of purity and corruption, compassion and cruelty. His version of Cinderella is no innocent fantasy, but a brutal mirror of human ambition, a recognition that beauty is born not from virtue, but from the courage to face what lies beneath it. Decades later, this same tale would find new life in the golden halls of Versailles, where illusion itself had become the highest art. In that world of mirrors and masks, Charles Perrault refined Basile's violent fable into something polished and deceptively innocent. Beneath the glittering chandeliers of Louis XIV's court, he transformed blood and grief into elegance and restraint, crafting a story that whispered political wisdom through the language of innocence. For in Versailles, survival depended not on violence, but on grace. The ability to smile under pressure, to yield without surrender. His Cendrillon became the perfect allegory for a society built on appearance and control. Unlike Zazola, Perrault's heroine does not fight her oppressors. She endures them with serenity so flawless it becomes its own weapon. Her patience, her composure, her refusal to fracture under cruelty all mark her as truly noble in a world obsessed with performance. Through subtle endurance rather than open defiance, she achieves what her predecessors sought through force, transcendence. Perrault's vision of Cinderella emerged not from fantasy, but from the glittering tension of Versailles, a world where power was performed and grace was survival. His heroine, renamed Cendrillon, reflects the perfection demanded of women in the age of Louis XIV, poised under pressure, luminous in restraint, and unfailingly kind even in the face of humiliation. Her gentleness is not weakness, but discipline, the learned ability to mask pain with a smile, to endure cruelty without retaliation. In her quiet patience lies the essence of true nobility. Perrault understood that aristocracy was never truly about birth, but about behavior, the art of appearing serene while the world tested your limits. The fairy godmother, his most brilliant innovation, is not a whimsical savior but a discerning judge. She does not arrive in pity, but in recognition. Only when Cendrillon has reached emotional maturity, when she can desire transformation without resentment, does help descend from the realm of magic. The godmother's calm presence is that of a mentor rather than a magician, assessing whether the girl's spirit can bear the weight of privilege. Her transformations, the pumpkin turned to coach, the mice to horses, the lizards to footmen, are not miracles of whimsy, but metaphors for the constructed artifice of class itself. Each metamorphosis glows with beauty, but each is fragile, temporary, and sustained only by illusion. The golden coach, born from a humble pumpkin, gleams with the dual meaning of abundance and deception. It symbolizes how imagination and will can elevate the ordinary into grandeur, but it also reminds us that splendor is often rooted in decay. The mice-turned horses gallop with a strange intelligence, still carrying the alertness of their former selves, proof that true transformation does not erase origins, but refines them. Even the lizards, cold and lowly, become impeccable attendants, yet their change lasts the shortest, a warning that some forms of service can only be maintained by constant enchantment. And then, the slipper, the most delicate symbol of all. Perrault's choice of glass is no accident. In his time, glass was the most exquisite luxury, dazzling, rare, and impractical. Its beauty depended on fragility. The slipper becomes a mirror of the aristocratic soul, transparent, easily shattered, impossible to counterfeit. It represents identity as spectacle, truth encased in artifice. Only Cendrillon can wear it because only she embodies the paradox it represents, purity sustained by performance. Midnight, the invisible hand that ends all enchantments, carries deeper meaning than any spell. In Perrault's world, it is the moment when artifice meets exhaustion, the precise hour when one's mask slips, when effort reveals its cost. Cendrillon's magic fails not because time expires, but because no one can indefinitely perform perfection. Her return to rags becomes not shame, but revelation, a reminder that every social ascent demands a return to the self. At the royal ball, Perrault unveils his true mastery of psychology. Cendrillon's triumph is not born of beauty alone, but of poise, the rare ability to be captivating without arrogance. Her movements are measured yet alive, her silences eloquent. She listens, observes, and mirrors others with effortless empathy. The prince's fascination with her is less romantic than magnetic, born of recognition. He senses in her a kind of balance he has never achieved, a harmony between humility and majesty. Meanwhile, her stepsisters embody the opposite approach to ambition. They chase power through performance, flaunting wealth and name, relying on connection rather than authenticity. They operate within the rigid machinery of hierarchy, seeking validation from the structures that already exist. Cendrillon transcends them not by competing, but by redefining the game. Her transformation is revolutionary because it does not imitate the elite. It reinvents what it means to be one. She embodies a new form of nobility, rooted not in lineage, but in elegance of soul. When the fateful search for the slipper begins, the story darkens. The stepsisters' mutilation, their desperate carving of flesh to fit the glass, is presented with chilling restraint. Perrault does not describe the horror directly. He lets the blood-stained shoe speak for itself. The violence lingers in the imagination, more haunting because it remains unseen. Their self-destruction is the final act of delusion, a literal sacrifice of the body to sustain the illusion of belonging. They cannot understand that refinement cannot be forced, it must be lived. Cendrillon's forgiveness, so often mistaken for naivety, is in truth the sharpest display of power. By granting her sisters wealth and marriage, she transforms enemies into dependents. Her mercy becomes dominance in disguise, a demonstration that true victory is not revenge, but the ability to elevate others from a position of control. She becomes not merely a queen but a patron, a figure whose grace is indistinguishable from authority. Yet beneath the triumph lies the cost. Cendrillon's ascension binds her to endless performance. She must forever embody the perfection that won her crown, for her status is not inherited but sustained through behavior. Perrault ends his tale not with liberation, but with burden, the unspoken truth that every constructed identity must be endlessly maintained. His conclusion is both luminous and chilling. Power, in the age of mirrors, depends on the ability to appear effortless while hiding the labor beneath. The story's enduring beauty lies in its deceit, a fantasy that comforts the powerless while subtly warning them of the price of transformation. Perrault's Cinderella endures not because it is innocent, but because it hides its danger behind that innocence. It is a lesson in politics disguised as a bedtime story, a moral treatise wrapped in silk and moonlight. It teaches that refinement can be learned, that grace can conquer brutality, and that mercy, when used wisely, is the most exquisite weapon of all. But it also whispers a darker truth. that every mask, no matter how radiant, must one day crack, revealing the fragile humanity beneath. As the tale crossed the Rhine and descended into the shadowed forests of Germany, it was stripped of its French grace and reborn in the grim clarity of Teutonic justice. The brothers Grimm, chroniclers of a darker moral order, saw in Aschenputtel not a fantasy of charm, but a meditation on discipline, endurance, and the price of purity in a brutal world. Their story does not shimmer, it bleeds. In their hands, the fairy tale becomes a parable of spiritual refinement through suffering, where transformation is earned, not through dreams, but through ordeal. Each of Aschenputtel's 3 nights at court is an initiation, a slow and deliberate test of her ability to inhabit the aristocratic sphere. Every evening she must perform perfection under scrutiny, her grace, her composure, her intellect, all examined by a prince whose love is indistinguishable from judgment. On the first night, he observes how she moves through the ballroom, how she converses without arrogance, how she adapts to protocol without needing instruction. On the second, his gaze sharpens. He tests her wit, her understanding of politics, her instinct for diplomacy, the quiet intelligence demanded of a queen. On the third night, the trials turn inward. The prince presents her with subtle moral choices, weighing her ability to balance compassion with authority. These are not romantic encounters, they are auditions for power. Her repeated flight each night is no whim of enchantment. It is strategy. Aschenputtel knows that mystery sustains fascination. In retreating, she preserves value, the unspoken lesson of every court where presence is currency. Each escape refines her performance, builds confidence, and hardens the poise she will need to rule. The slipper, that fragile token of recognition, takes on new and ancient meaning in the Grimm universe. It is no mere accessory, it is a relic of judgment. Shaped by unseen forces, it functions as a supernatural test of truth, an ordeal through which purity must prove itself. In Germanic law, innocence was once decided by divine ordeal, fire, water, iron, tests through which only the righteous could emerge unscathed. The slipper inherits this sacred logic. It fits only the foot that destiny has measured, and no deception can alter that truth. The stepsister's mutilation thus becomes more than envy. It is blasphemy. In carving away their flesh, they attempt to forge fate with steel, to reshape the divine will by violence. The eldest, slicing off her toes with a kitchen knife, embodies the soul's desperation to meet impossible standards. Her pain calls forth witnesses from another world. Ravens perched upon the castle walls, crying in human voices, "Turn back! Turn back! There is blood on the track." They are not mere birds, but emissaries of divine justice, the black heralds of a moral order that tolerates no falsehood. The second sister, more cunning but no wiser, severs her heel. For a moment she fools the court, the slipper fitting her foot like truth half believed. Yet with every step the illusion grows heavier until it collapses under its own deceit. The enchanted glass rejects her. Blood flows in rivers, thick and eloquent, as if the very life within her denounces the lie. In the ancient German imagination, blood was alive. It spoke, remembered, and bore witness. Here, it testifies against its owner, proclaiming that pain without virtue yields nothing but ruin. But the violence in the Grimm tale serves more than punishment. It is initiation into an unflinching moral order. In this world, every act of deception summons consequence, and every virtue demands sacrifice. The stepsister's agony is both literal and symbolic, a warning that the body cannot substitute for the soul. Transformation achieved through force is corruption. Transformation achieved through suffering becomes grace. When Aschenputtel finally stands revealed, the fit of the slipper is absolute, almost divine. The glass does not merely accommodate her foot, it reshapes itself around her essence, becoming an extension of her spirit. In that instant, identity and destiny fuse. The ordeal ends. Her ascension is sanctified not by beauty, but by worth. Yet the story's final justice is far from gentle. During the wedding procession, as bells toll and music swells, the ravens return, not as witnesses this time, but as executioners. They descend upon the stepsisters with surgical precision, tearing out the eyes that once looked upon innocence with envy. It is punishment as theology, crime answered by symmetry. The eyes that failed to see goodness are stripped away, so that truth may at last be visible. What shocks modern readers is that the crowd does not recoil. The witnesses cheer. To them, this spectacle of divine retribution is not cruelty, but confirmation that the moral order still holds. Their applause becomes a hymn of relief, proof that the universe, though harsh, remains just. In the world of the Grimms, mercy is rare, and justice must often be written in blood. Through this darkness, the tale achieves a terrible beauty. Aschenputtle's triumph is not simply personal, it is cosmic. Her endurance affirms that virtue, when aligned with divine will, survives the world's corruption. Her rise to queenship signals the restoration of balance, the elevation of the pure-hearted not by chance, but by celestial design. The Grimm brothers' genius lay in recognizing that morality without consequence is meaningless, and that even innocence must walk through violence to reach redemption. Their version of Cinderella endures because it exposes what later retellings conceal, that goodness in a world built on hierarchy and pain cannot remain untouched. It must bleed, suffer, and evolve until it earns the right to reign. And when it does, its reign is absolute, not in gentleness, but in justice. In England's fractured social order, where titles weighed more than virtue and manners became weapons sharper than swords, transformation no longer served divine justice or supernatural compulsion. It became a calculated rebellion within the architecture of class itself. The English Cinderella was neither martyr nor mystic, but strategist, a performer trained by hardship to exploit the moral theater of aristocracy. Her ashes were not symbols of purity, but camouflage, a disguise refined by centuries of women navigating systems designed to erase them. Transformation here meant learning the codes of power so perfectly that those who wrote them could no longer tell whether she was imitating or inheriting their authority. The ball was no enchanted moment. It was a battleground of gazes and gestures, where mastery of appearance determined survival. In these versions, the fairy godmother becomes less a supernatural benefactor and more an allegory for social manipulation, the silent network of servants, widows, and forgotten women who conspired in secret to elevate one of their own. Every thread of silk, every polished gem represented collective defiance stitched into glamour. When she enters the ballroom, she doesn't radiate innocence, she radiates control. The same lords who had mocked her for her ashes now kneel, unable to understand how their own symbols of refinement have been turned against them. Her elegance is a form of violence, a mirror in which the ruling class sees its own fragility reflected with surgical precision. The glass slipper remains, but its meaning shifts once again. No longer a divine test of virtue or a magical relic, it becomes a weapon of evidence, a fragment of the masquerade left behind, not by accident, but by design. A reminder that power recognizes performance only when it sees itself within it. Yet even within this English rationalization of the tale, the older mythic residue refuses to die. Beneath the lace and candlelight lingers the echo of older laws. The Germanic trials by ordeal, the Celtic contracts, the Norse winter pacts. Each retelling carries within it the DNA of the cultures that birthed it, fusing divine justice, supernatural politics, and social theater into one evolving myth about transformation and survival. In the Germanic imagination, justice was forged through blood, truth enforced by ravens, and divine vengeance. In the Celtic world, truth was bound by contract, a debt negotiated with beings who remembered every broken promise. And in the Scandinavian night, truth froze into beauty, the kind that kills as easily as it preserves. By the time the story reached England, it had absorbed all three. The German sense of moral retribution, the Irish fascination with pacts and power, the Norse awe of elemental majesty, each transformed into social performance, into the theater of class and virtue that defined British civilization. But the cost remained. In every culture, the price of transformation was the same: a loss of innocence, a wound carried as proof of initiation. The German stepsisters mutilated their feet in a grotesque parody of ascension, blood for status. The Celtic heroine carried generational debts that no mortal could ever repay. The Scandinavian maiden lost warmth itself, beautiful forever, but unable to feel human touch. And the English Cinderella, polished to perfection, lost anonymity. She became visible, too visible, trapped forever in the role she performed so flawlessly. The ashes she once wore for concealment became memory, the only proof that transformation, however glorious, demands erasure of the self that once was. Through these centuries of retelling, the Cinderella figure evolved from victim to initiate, from peasant dreamer to ritual participant in civilization's ongoing negotiation with power. Each version reveals not fantasy, but cultural truth. That transformation, whether granted by God, fairy, or sheer determination, always involves violence, sacrifice, and performance. The story never promised happiness. It promised revelation. When we look back at these ancient variants, we find not comfort, but diagnosis. The Grimm brothers exposed the moral machinery of aristocracy, showing that purity without power invites destruction, and virtue must learn the language of violence to survive. The Irish storytellers, guarding the twilight between faith and paganism, warned that no blessing comes free, that every gift from the other world demands repayment in kind. And the Norse poets, staring into endless winter, taught that beauty without pain is false, and that survival itself is an act of worship toward the indifferent elements. Together they form not a children's tale, but a theology of endurance, a study in what humanity must surrender to ascend. The glass slipper is not a prize. It is a shackle, transparent, perfect, and brutally fragile. It demands balance, precision, and eternal vigilance, for a single misstep shatters both illusion and identity. It fits only once, and once worn it cannot be removed without breaking. Perhaps that is why the tale endures. Beneath its shimmering surface, Cinderella speaks not of escape, but of metamorphosis, the perilous art of becoming seen. Her story belongs not to children dreaming of magic, but to civilizations wrestling with hierarchy, morality, and the impossible promise that virtue alone might triumph. It endures because every society remakes it to explain itself, because every generation must decide whether transformation comes as blessing, bargain, or curse. And as the centuries turn, we recognize her again, in palaces and in boardrooms, in ashes and in light. The girl who walked through violence, contract, and ice to claim her place at the table of power. Her beauty is no longer passive, her silence no longer obedience. She is the remnant of every culture's moral experiment, the one who proves that transformation once begun can never be undone. Across the shifting sands of the Middle East, where faith and fable intertwine beneath centuries of conquest and prayer, the story of transformation assumes a more sacred dimension. Here, the girl among ashes does not rise through luck or cunning, but through the decree of destiny itself. In the Egyptian legend of Rhodopis, the lost sandal is carried not by chance, but by divine intention, lifted by the falcon god Horus, and placed before the pharaoh as a sign of selection. Her rise is therefore not a social triumph, but a cosmic recognition, the universe acknowledging the purity of one who suffers without bitterness. This version of the tale reflects a world in which human effort and divine will intertwine in complex negotiations. Transformation is no rebellion against fate. It is the unfolding of fate itself. The heroine's humility becomes a form of worship, her silence a kind of prayer. Her ascension is not earned by merit, but permitted by alignment, a spiritual geometry in which obedience to higher law becomes the only path to transcendence. Later, Persian and Arabic retellings transformed this divine logic into moral allegory. The cruel stepmother ceased to be merely human. She became the embodiment of the lower self, the nafs, that clings to envy, desire, and illusion. The suffering of the girl symbolized purification of the soul, and her final revelation at the king's side represented annihilation of ego in divine unity. The slipper, ring, or talisman became the remnant of identity left behind on the threshold of transcendence, proof that she has passed through the fire of trial and emerged refined. These stories carried subtle instructions for survival within rigid hierarchies. They were whispered among servants, concubines, and captives who understood the peril of beauty and the politics of obedience. Beneath their piety ran a current of strategy, a recognition that silence could be weaponized, that endurance could become mastery, and that patience itself could turn oppression into power. The lost shoe was not a token of romance, but a signature of existence, a trace that said, "I was here, and the gods have seen me." Far to the east, another current of this ancient myth flowed into the mountains and river valleys of China, where transformation was measured not by ambition, but by harmony. The earliest surviving tale speaks of Ye Xian, a gentle girl whose only companion is a golden fish. The spirit of her dead mother returned in luminous form. When her stepmother kills the fish, Ye Xian gathers its bones, discovering that the essence of love cannot be destroyed. From the remains of suffering emerges divine assistance, not through rebellion, but remembrance. Her transformation is not a spectacle of wealth or desire. It is a reflection of natural order restored. Her gown glimmers not because it is rich, but because it embodies the balance of heaven and earth, water and metal, endurance and wisdom. When she enters the festival, she does not dazzle, she harmonizes. Every gesture reaffirms the equilibrium that cruelty has disturbed. In her stillness lies the universe's quiet correction. The East does not celebrate transformation as disguise. It understands it as revelation, the peeling away of false layers until only authenticity remains. The heroine does not become something new, she remembers what she already was. Her triumph is the restoration of moral symmetry. The prince does not discover her beauty. He witnesses her alignment with the Tao, and through that recognition, harmony returns to the world. In the heart of Africa, where ancestry speaks louder than kings, the story changes once again. The girl in ashes becomes the child of the ancestors, tested, watched, and weighed by spirits who demand integrity over charm. Her trials take her into the forest, where the living meet the dead, and the unseen measures the worth of the seen. When she shows kindness to a beggar spirit and receives a gourd that pours endless abundance, her elevation becomes communal rather than personal. Her goodness nourishes the tribe. Her transformation restores balance to the living world. The cruelty of her sister and stepmother is not merely punished. It is exposed as a distortion in the moral fabric. In these tales, beauty and virtue are inseparable from responsibility. To be chosen by fate is to inherit obligation. The prince is not a suitor, but an emissary of the ancestors, the visible hand of invisible justice. The wedding is not romance, but reconciliation between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Every culture cloaks the same truth in different garments. The European speaks of glass slippers and ambition. The African speaks of gourds and ghosts. The Asian of bones and balance. The Middle Eastern of divine decree. Yet all of them whisper the same secret. Transformation is perilous. It is never granted freely. It demands surrender, sacrifice, and the willingness to be remade by forces that do not bargain. The tale survives because it teaches through beauty what cannot be spoken through law. It instructs the soul in the grammar of endurance. The heroine's rise is not a reward. It is the proof that she has endured purification by ordeal. The slipper, no matter its form, fits only the one who has suffered correctly. Modern minds remember the glitter but forget the gravity. They retell the story as entertainment, polishing away its darker truths until only sentiment remains. But beneath every sparkling adaptation, the old law endures. No transformation without loss. No elevation without the consent of powers beyond comprehension. The girl who rose from ashes was never meant to be a fantasy of comfort. She was, and remains, a warning that to change one's destiny is to trespass into sacred territory where every gift carries its unseen price and every ascension leaves a shadow. And so the story lives on, in temples and classrooms, in songs and screens, whispering its dangerous wisdom in 1,000 tongues, that beauty forged by suffering is indestructible, that humility hides divine fire, and that those who dare to transform must be ready to pay in currencies the modern world no longer understands. And if tonight's descent into the forgotten heart of human myth has stirred something within you, a question, a chill, or perhaps a recognition, then let that spark not fade. Support this journey into the shadowed corners of history by subscribing to the channel. Like this video if the echoes of ancient wisdom reached you, and ring the bell, not for mere notification, but as a ritual, a signal to the unseen, that you are ready to walk once more into the darkness with us. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some fairy tales were never meant for children.